Hi, I'm Master Wintery, and I'm kicking off a new series here on my YouTube channel. Sort of a podcast that I'm jokingly calling I Gotta Hear This. Um, we'll see if that name sticks or not. But the general premise is that as a composer, sometimes you work really, really hard on something that then just isn't heard by anybody, or it never seems to catch the audience that you think it deserves. And not necessarily because of one's own work, but because maybe it's part of a film or a game or a TV show or something that just somehow didn't really find an audience. And it is a reality amongst those who write soundtracks for a living that if the show or the game doesn't find an audience, your music is almost guaranteed to not as well. The result is that there's a lot of really talented composers, including composers that you're very likely familiar with, who have projects and pieces of music that they're very proud of, that they worked really hard on, and that you most likely never heard. And in my case, I, even as someone who keeps his ear to the ground pretty tightly with this sort of thing, have never heard. So to kick off this series, I asked my friend, the composer Daniel Pemberton, to jump on a call with me and just share with me a few pieces of his that he thinks fits this description. I didn't curate the list at all. I just had him send them to me, and I listened to him live while we discussed it. It was a lot of fun, and I'm planning more of these coming soon. Let me know what you think. Hope you enjoy. Most composers that I'm friends with have like the things people know and then the things that people don't know as much or truly don't know, just like
Most of mine is the things people don't know.
I'm not so sure about that, but
Yeah.
yeah, I thought, we spend so much time having to kind of squeeze everything we can out of those that actually get heard by people, that it's fun to just
Yeah.
put a light on a thing and go, hey, what's the thing that you worked your ass off on, remember having a good time, or you're happy with how it turned out, and just by the luck of the draw, people are not as familiar with it, and let's just kind of zero in on those.
Okay.
So the first one I have up here is from Birds of Prey. You want to play the whole thing, or do you want to just hear a taste of it? Or what do you want to say before I play, if anything?
Well, yeah, Birds of Prey was a crazy project. I kind of got brought on sort of kind of a bit later than normal. Um, and it was always this kind of thing where there was this big, I wouldn't say fight, but there was definitely a lot of complexity over them wanting to shoehorn in as much commercial music as possible.
Right. Needle
And
drops.
and and not really understand what you can do with score.
Mm.
It was just like we just want to fit as many sort of songs in this as we can, even if they don't make any sense because we need to put this album out. And I kind of knew that was the deal going in, and that a lot of my stuff would probably get junked because you often find as a composer all the really sexy bits of real estate. They're like, oh, we'll put a song there.
Especially a
But I
movie
kind
like
of went
that.
in. Yeah, I kind of went in knowing that, and I was just like, look, just leave me, let me just do what I want to do, and you know, give me the sort of tools to do it, and I'll just do it anyway. Don't like it, fine, bin it, put a song there. And so there's some really, really great cues in that film that almost no one knows because they didn't end up in the film. And I had an amazing time because we had to record it in LA, and it was kind of like anything you want, just you got it. And I was in LA with my mixer Sam Raquel, and we basically worked in pretty much every studio in LA. So many great musicians. Just like, I need a choir. Fine, you got a choir. They're coming tomorrow. Great. And so, and the thing about
which
that
stage? Were you at Fox?
no, well, the thing is, the score is not a traditional orchestral score. So most of the recording was all done in places like Sunset Sound.
Oh,
Did a
nice.
lot there. The drums were in Sunset Sound, especially on this track. Had this amazing drummer called Abraham Rounds, and Sam is just brilliant at getting great drum sounds up. And this was the room where they recorded all the Led Zeppelin drums, like the really iconic ones.
Mm.
And so he just said, right, we set the drums, that's the kind of sound I wanted. He had this great thing where the drummer's playing. I was like, give me the Levy's break beat. So he's giving that beat, and Sam just goes, right, here's the beat. Do you want it more Led Zeppelin? And just fade it up, zoom, two of the room, like the room mics, or less, and turn it down. And it was amazing how like insane that sound was. It's just got a great drum sound. And so I was just like, I'm just going to enjoy working with these great musicians. And I'd sketched out a whole journey through that film, very similar to what I did with Spider-Verse. Themes for every character. This is the big fight at the end where all the themes come together. But of course, if you've binned off half those moments earlier that are really important to pinpoint all this stuff together, it doesn't make any sense.
You're right.
And of course, that's kind of what happened. But because Harley Quinn as a character was really like sort of crazy, I felt I could go really crazy with the music, and I'm not particularly drawn towards doing superhero comic book movies normally, but with this one I kind of felt I had the opportunity to just go a bit bananas. And this cue is kind of the culmination of like all the other cues in the film. It's got these amazing opera singers just screaming, which was really good fun. We've got these fantastic opera singers who had such amazing range, and I'm like, just scream like some kind of like killer bird. You've got like all this quite cool 303 synth stuff. That you've got this like great drums. You've got Harley's kind of like rocky riff stuff, which is sort of a bit Rage Against the Machine-y. And then you've also got this other character, Huntress's sort of flute, and it all culminates in their big theme at the end. But of course, this was the big fight at the end, which was never working as well as it should. And the studio were like, we need to put a song over the first half of it. And at one stage, the song was Beastie Boys' Sabotage, which is the most kind of like, oh my God, you don't really mean that, do you? And for a while it was, I mean, it got changed to Barracuda, but it was just, there wasn't a lot of joined up thinking in terms of like how this film could work, in terms of like what my music could bring to it. But I kind of knew that was going to happen, so I just thought, well, fuck it, I'll have fun anyway. And
so in other words, half of this is not in the film. Like it's
yeah. So it's like the second half is, but you don't get the whole journey. I think it damaged the end of the film by cutting it in half. But who am I? I'm just a guy who thinks about the film all the time. But there's a load of tracks on this album that are great, and they aren't in the film, so no one's ever listened to this album. I think this album is a crazy album of like giving someone a lot of money to make a record. But basically, I just went to LA to make a crazy album that somehow might end up in a film, and that was my approach. I was just like, we're just going to make a mad album. Let's just do it. If some of it ends up in the film, great. If it doesn't, whatever. That's I've done my side of the bargain, and I really like this album, and I really think people have not discovered its craziness, because there's some great stuff in there. And this for me is like the big culmination of all the themes, big payoff. And it's kind of similar to what I did at the end of Spider-Verse, and everyone's like, oh my God, you've combined all these character themes into one piece, which as film composers we know shouldn't be that unusual, but I do think it is sadly unusual in these kind of movies. And anyway, here it is on this one.
Yeah, well, all right, I love it. That plenty I could respond to, but I love. That's a great wind up. Let me just hit play.
Do we now have to stand here really awkwardly, just looking like? Is it playing?
Do you not hear it?
I don't hear it. Audio's not streaming. Can you hear it now?
All right, good.
So do I keep my mouth shut, or do I talk over this?
No, if you've got things to say, go for it.
These screams here are so great.
That's your LA singers.
Yeah.
Where'd you track the singers? Was it also?
No, that Henson.
Oh wow, Henson. Oh, recorded there in a long time.
So here's vocals doing cuckoo, cuckoo, making bird sounds.
None of this is in there.
This bit isn't. A lot of this rock stuff that came out doing these really cool jams where we basically just jam with the musicians around the stuff I'd written. For, you know, like 10 minutes, I'd just shout direction to a thing.
I assume you give them, like, they're those, all the synth parts and things were in there, and they were playing to a click, basically, and just, you were guiding them, I assume.
Yeah, they're playing to a click. They've got the main riff, which is the Harlequin sort of theme I wrote for the film.
Right.
Then here's a great bunch of like 303 stuff. Okay. That's this other character, Huntress, yeah. I think this is where it turns up in the film.
I mean, at least they picked a distinctive moment to come in with.
Yeah.
But yeah, I get what you mean about if you're planting seeds of themes and no one's heard those themes, a lot of this would feel like it's just score. It's just kind of there to flesh it out.
Yeah. You got this big fight sequence here, and eventually it'll come together at the end, which is where you get that cuckoo cuckoo theme, but it actually like suddenly blossoming into something that is bigger, which you'll hear in a bit. But I love these screams.
When you were doing that, is that one of those where you just got them to give you a bunch of screams and then you went in and kind of found ways to place them? Or did you actually kind of have it more bespoke, written out, like, here it's going to be like this,
no,
here it's going to be like that?
It was a bit of everything. This sequence kept changing, to be honest, so it was a bit of like having to move things around and
Right.
big payoff there.
Where'd you track those strings?
The strings were done, I think, on the Newman stage at Fox.
Yeah.
But
It's just, I'm always curious because
remember.
you've recorded comparatively little in LA, if memory serves.
Yeah, this one we had to. It was a kind of like
Yeah, there's
a sort of
signatory.
tax thing. Yeah,
Right.
which I was fine with.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, look, it's, LA is basically the only place that can really kind of go toe to toe with what's available in London. And it's kind of the other side of the coin. It's different stuff, different flavors, but you can do crazy shit here. And you're like, hey, if I want to do 19, saxophone, like alto sax, tenor doublers that also play accordion, they're like, we can have it Tuesday, so yeah, that's fucking awesome. And it's so interesting, isn't it, how tied to the film things like that are. Like that's seemingly just objectively a, like you said, it's just a good, it's a record. It's a thing that's just music that should sort of survive and live by itself and catch people's ears. But something about soundtracks where if it's not one of those scores that just kind of catches people or it's really featured in the movie, they just go so under the radar.
Yeah, if it's not turned, if you turn it up, everyone's like, "Wow, that sounds great." I mean, so many scores, you just listen to them loud, you're like, this is great." But so often they're kind of hidden below things, or um, and I think I've approached a lot of scores in the way of like, well, I'm just going to make a cool record that happens to work for film, and hopefully some people dig that. And sometimes they do, and sometimes like birds of prey, they don't. But but if you haven't checked it out, I think there's a bunch. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff on there that feels a bit scory, but there is a bunch of cues in there which really just have crazy musicianship, crazy production, and it's like one of those things you're like, that is a very expensive track, and not that expense isn't any way important, but that kind of thing. It felt a bit like when people used to make rock records in the '70s, where just like, yeah, we'll get a gospel choir in, get some Hammond players, let's get somebody who plays tubular bells, and you just put them all on the tracks, and it's just a fun journey, that one.
Yeah, yeah. I every now and again will have an experience that kind of gives that little taste of what that era must have felt like. Just the amount of detail that would go in. The idea that people would spend a year on like 8 tracks of music, 3 minutes a piece, just lets you go to such an insane level of detail.
Yeah.
What a joy.
Yeah,
And
and I would do that
rare.
on those albums. We'd go into a lot of detail about the drum sounds, the band performances, because I just wanted to make something that sounded kind of cool. And yeah, anyway, that was a weird film. Like I was really trying to help the director Kathy Yan. I thought had a cool vision for it, but there was a lot of politics going on that project. Surprise, surprise for a
Yeah.
DC film.
It's
And
funny
so
how the
it's
whole
just trying to
DC thing
navigate.
is so cursed seemingly. Like none of those films really ever seem to just escape with their coherence fully realized.
Yeah, there was a lot of cooks around on that. So I was just trying to like, that sort of thing where sometimes you kind of got to listen to everyone, but you've also got to do what you think is going to work best for the film. So I did what I did, and some of it's in there, some of it isn't.
Well, I admire the level of detachment. That's for sure one of my weaknesses is I get really invested and I'm like,
Oh no, I'm
fighting.
invested. I will fight. I will really fight on stuff, but it's like there's a point where you're like, okay, it's done. It's like I still, for me, it's the act of creation and making the music, which is my favorite thing. And there's always so much, like there's so much sort of politics on films that could really drag you down if you let it. And sometimes you just got to be like, okay, move on to the next one. I'm always like, if people, like, I always like it when someone gets the best out of me. Like a really good project is when someone gets the best out of me and you hear the best of me on screen. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And if they don't, you're kind of like, well, that's your decision. I've tried to fight very hard for that, but
Presumably it would be things like freedom to actually participate in it that would bring out the best in you. From your point of view, is that a fair take
I
on?
think it's a thing where it's like I know how I can make these. Big songs can always make scenes exciting, and it's not like if it's better for the film, I'll be like, yeah, that song works better. But sometimes it's like if there's a like just a need to put songs in purely because that artist is on a label who they're trying to like get on the album and is a big name and doesn't really have any connection to the film,
Right. Just
and
for its
that's what
own
you want to
sake.
do. Yeah, but whatever.
Yeah, indeed. We live to fight another day. Well, let's shift gears to something pretty different. At least if memory serves. I actually intentionally didn't
Yeah.
listen to these. At least
Okay.
at least one or two of them I had heard before, or at least I'm pretty sure I had. But I thought I'm gonna just try to be as fresh as possible. So the next one I have queued up here is Motherless Brooklyn. Big about face
Okay.
from Harley Quinn.
Yeah. So this was a film that Edward Norton directed and starred in. I thought it was a really beautiful film, sort of noir New York detective tale, and I wanted to try and find a way to sort of write a sort of noir score that felt kind of more modern. And in some ways, this cue is probably the most traditional of them that we're going to play. There's a whole bunch of stuff where I sampled all these kind of saxophone loops off this amazing guy called Thomas Challenger, and then sort of built score around them. Just got kind of like weird organic electronic hybrid with like
Mm.
live jazz. But this is kind of like the main theme for the central, like one of the central characters played by Gugu Mbatha-Raw, and she's this kind of mysterious woman. He's sort of trailing, and it was just it was just nice to write something that was um, had a bit of complexity to it emotionally.
Mm.
Um, and I mean, one of the things in this I actually really like that's very, very subtle is the whole saxophone line is doubled by I can never pronounce it right, Odes Martineau. I
Yep.
pronounced that right. And if you listen very closely, you can hear that behind the saxophone line, very subtle, and it just gives it a slightly surreal quality.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, maybe just play it, this one.
Sold. I'm such a sucker for this kind of thing.
Yes, it is fun doing. As here's this sort of big change, which is where the song really starts in a way.
I would never have been able to tell you that you've got your little Ons Martineau doubling the sax. It feels like it's maybe a processing trick, like a kind of a unique reverb or something.
Yeah, it's
That's
very
a,
subtle.
yeah, but but you can feel that there's something beyond just the sax, some treatment or something, like a purity. You can feel it there.
Yeah, probably giving away a good secret there.
I really
It's
like
weird for me
also.
because
Go ahead.
no, it's weird for me because whenever I hear these things, I know these scenes so well. So I'm just like re-seeing the scene in my head, but no one else probably knows it. So this is in the film, luckily.
Yeah, cool. That's good. um, I really like from a production standpoint also that you're doing something kind of like what Jerry did on the Russia House, where the piano is very present in the mix, so is the bass, and the sax is kind of wonderfully kind of close to mid in terms of presence, but the strings feel like they're playing in a freaking stadium down the road, like really roomy and spacious, and so you have this kind of blurring of perspectives. I remember Jerry did something kind of similar in the opening of the Rush House, and I always thought that was such a great, like, just tasteful way to get this sound. Very
Yeah, it's good to
ambient
get the strings a bit more blurry.
Yeah, they just feel really like you're on tree and surrounds or something only, and there's just zero texture to the actual spot mics and things. And it's just I love it. Especially for that super atmospheric stuff. Was this all? Did you do all this in London?
We did a bunch in London, then I had to go to New York, and we recorded a few things to Winton Marsalis as well. But most of it was done in
Is
London.
that who was playing there?
Not on
Oh
that
wait,
one,
no, no,
no,
but
because
You
that's
said
saxophone.
Winton.
Yeah,
Yeah, my brain
yeah,
pictured Branford
yeah.
because of the Rush House connection. That's funny. I was
Well,
just
yeah, Branford played on Hackers, which is a great score. James Horner.
yep.
Um,
Sneakers.
Sneakers, not Hackers.
Yeah.
Sneakers, much better film. Hackers, not a good film.
No, but yeah, I mean that dude. Yeah, that's a both he and Winton would be awesome to work with. I was just talking about that literally yesterday with somebody. That's that's uh, that's exciting. I had no idea that you had worked with him.
Sure.
What was Ed Norton's um, kind of directing style with regard to music? Folks that spend a lot of
I
time in front of the camera often have a very different perspective. So I was just curious how that went down.
Oh, he was great. It was very. I mean, he came over to London and pretty much was here for like 2 weeks and would literally be sitting here next to me. And it was very surreal because I'd be looking all day at the screen and I'd be looking at Edward Norton and I'd turn around there and there'd be Edward Norton. And then he was staying around my house pretty much. He stayed at a hotel, but he'd spend the whole day just crashing at my house. And I basically had like a week of it's like being in John Malkovich. Everywhere I looked, I saw Edward Norton. But he was a lovely guy, really passionate. He really, that film was a big project that he threw everything into, and it's always a shame it didn't. You do these projects sometimes. And, I've watched it as sort of critical analysis gets decided quite early on, and people
Mm.
just go with that. And yeah, it didn't like in terms of critically didn't blow a load of people away, and so everyone else decided to follow the same line. And I've seen that all through my sort of career of like, you know, people all start saying the same as everyone else, and it's really interesting because I've really become a lot more conscious of not if someone says that film's not very good, you sort of dismiss it, and then you watch it, and you're like, holy fuck, this is amazing. I mean,
Right.
a great example is Sorcerer with William Friedkin, which everyone's now rediscovering what an absolutely masterpiece piece of
Mm.
cinema it is. So I really like Motherless Brooklyn. It's got some, it's got a great vibe, some beautiful moments in it. And I was always really fond of that score. It's just fun for me to do something that's more in that kind of arena.
Right. Yeah. I people that you know can swivel from uh, Rage Against the Machine vibes to classic sort of noir without losing their sort of sense of self are pretty rare. But yeah, I guess I like many people. I never saw that film. I remember hearing about it, but just somehow never made time for it. And as much as I feel like I generally am familiar with your work, I hadn't heard that, and it's really nice.
Good purpose of the show. There's some stuff on that album I really love. So
What year was
again,
that? How long ago? I can't really remember when I
uh,
remember.
I don't know, 2019 maybe
Oh, it's more recent than I thought. In my memory, it
or
was.
2018.
Yeah, I thought it was further back than that. 1981.
No,
All
it wasn't
right.
made then.
uh,
That'd be three.
yeah. Well, I don't know. You're a precocious lad. I could see you being like,
Yeah.
"Let's do it."
Yeah.
Rising Phoenix.
Yeah. This was a documentary about the Paralympics and disability, which these great filmmakers, Peter and Ian, did. And I loved this film. I turned down a very big movie to do this, which I always feel quite pleased about. I basically got offered a big movie, which I'm not going to say what it is. And I was offered a lot of money to do this big movie. And my agent was like, this is a lot of money. And I was like, yeah, but it's going to be crap. It's going to be crap. I know it's going to be crap. And I'm not going to be able to do anything interesting. And there's this documentary about the disabled and the Paralympics, and I like it so much more. And he's like, they haven't got any money. I'm like, yeah, but it's better. Let's do that. He's like, okay. Uh,
Crucially,
uh,
did that
and
other film turn out crap as you predicted?
yes, it did. It did. It was a film for a streaming platform. It was very successful on a streaming platform in terms of like one of their biggest movies, but was critically had the shit kicked out of it,
Yeah.
and kind of what I sort of suspected it would be like. But so this film, I really loved it. I really believed in it. It's such a moving. It's on Netflix. It's called Rising Phoenix. The trouble is, no one ever saw this movie
I remember you talking about this when
because
we were in Ghent, and it
yeah,
seemed amazing from your description.
it's a really powerful movie, and it was kind of one of these things where I never understood why Netflix bought it and then buried it. And I sort of the cynical side of me, and I'm sure this wouldn't be the case, is they bought two documentaries about disability. One called Crip Camp, it's also very good, and Rising Phoenix. And Crip Camp they pushed insanely hard for Oscars and stuff.
Right.
And
Yeah, that played at Sundance.
Rising Phoenix they kind of buried. And if I was cynical, I would almost think they bought it because they didn't want another streamer to have a disability documentary that they could there's only room for one disability documentary apparently.
Yeah.
So
Right.
anyway, so it's one of these things that hardly anyone's seen. And for the end credit song, like I wanted to work. We wanted to do this end credit song for the film. So, the film is incredibly moving and powerful. And we talked about getting some big name type artists, but then we're all like, why? We should get actual disabled artists with disabilities. We use some on the score
Right.
to play on it. But I really wanted to get them. So we kind of did this crazy thing where we found these hip hop artists in America. There's a whole scene called Crip Hop, which is about disabled people making hip hop. And they're completely overlooked and completely sidelined. And it's unbelievably frustrating. And even when we did this song, I was like, we've got this song, we've got video, we've got all these things. No one would play it. Spotify, I literally had to shame Spotify into putting it onto a playlist. I was like, how is this not on a playlist? Like, you've got Coldplay dropped it on their socials, all these kind of things, and no one wanted to touch it. And the truth is,
That's strange.
e- everyone will be like, oh yeah, we're all for whatever the current in vogue
Yeah, inclusivity and
causes. Yeah. But when it comes to disability, they're like, yeah, we don't give a fuck. It's like they really, really stayed away from it. And I think the song is really powerful because the song is really these three different artists, which is George DeMann, Tony Hickman, and Keith Jones. They are literally talking about their lives and what it's like to be living with disability, and the anger and the power and the emotion of what they're talking about is so strong, and that's kind of what makes the track. It's not, I've done the backing, it's kind of cool, but it's their story. And when it all came together, I really didn't know what this piece would be like. I really thought it could have been a bit of a disaster, but it really was one of those things where I thought we just got something really magic here. And the Paralympics love it. They used it. It got used in the closing ceremony of the Olympics, and the Paralympics kind of wanted to adopt it as their sort of theme tune. They're like, this means so much to anyone who's a Paralympian.
wow.
But weirdly, it's still one of these things outside that very small niche, and the small niche of people who've seen this movie. No one's ever heard this song, but you've got to listen to the lyrics. The lyrics are like fantastic, and it's really about just battling against people's perceptions. And
And you said you produced kind of the underlying backing track.
yeah, basically the track is like it's the culmination of the theme of the film. This is like
Got
the
it.
theme of the film, and this is the culmination at the end. And we actually won an Emmy for it, so that's the one thing I was just like, yay. So yeah, it won a sports Emmy for best music direction. But for me, the song is a sort of thing where it's like I'm kind of a small part of something else, but I don't think enough people have discovered it. So let's discover it now.
Yeah. Well done.
There's a young boy walking through obstacles, cut up from all the surgery, prosthetic picture perjury, telling me I'm normal, but normal they never really made me see. They always painted me, discriminated but levitated through all the hated scenes. So I redrew how they made it seem. But that's what you feel around vultures and all the fatal schemes. They wanna label me a cripple, that's the way it seems. Take away my right to pursue a normal life.
Indeed, for me, I must proceed and shine bright like the sun. Even though I know the darkness will come, it's all temporary. I can be legendary, cause I will never stop believing in me. It doesn't matter what you think I should be. See, I am what I am, I'm the truth. I'm disabled, I'm amazing, understand. Don't you ever underrate me, cause I got a second chance. And I choose to be the greatest in whatever the plan is. All my life, right? I ignite life. A kaboom when I step in the room, so please don't get distracted. Yes, my limbs are fractured, still I rise from the ashes. I'm a rising phoenix. I rise above you. I'm a rising phoenix.
So the next bit coming up, the next rapper is this guy called Keith Jones. I just love his voice. He's got cerebral palsy. And it's got those weird things like, have you ever heard anyone with cerebral palsy rap? And it just changes the way he speaks. Here we go.
Wow.
Your lack of intuition, presuming my condition predictions in the BS. 5 and 8 arrive, transform the light before the eyes and into the sky. They ask you for a while, but Phoenix rise. Lead an example and do everything in life I see. A simple thing like riding a bike, we are alike. How is that enlightening? There's so much fighting, cause my superpower, it makes me different, it's lightning. Wait, how many obstacles I gotta break? How many fights I gotta face? Just to make you feel my fate. I shake, then I break down. Yeah, but I take all the weight down.
I'm a rising phoenix.
There's a great video for this. If you want to hear it again, put all the lyrics in. It really shows you the film. Just type in Rising Phoenix lyric video. And all these guys, all the artists on this were all unsigned.
Wow. How'd you find them? Just Googling? They were already attached to the
we
film
hooked
somehow?
We hooked up with this organization called Crip Hop Nation, and they put us all together.
So there's already kind of a network of folks that keep up with each other in some sense.
Yeah.
Often inspired by pain inflicted by the inhumane, with hearts as black as the grain. My disability is silent, but my bottled up rage got me running from my dreams 100 miles with one leg. So how dare you try to remind me that I don't fit into your perception? How dare you define me? I'm beyond what you see as perfection. I'm a rising phoenix. I rise above you. I'm a rising phoenix. I rise above you.
Yeah, nice. I remember you talking about that at the Ghent thing, and I remember thinking, oh, you really need to watch that, and then just got distracted after getting home and never ended up watching it. But the premise sounded great from what you described, and that's terrific.
It's the hardest thing, I think, with sometimes when you do these projects and they go to streamers, if they don't take off within a couple of days, they're just dead forever. It's kind of like they never existed. And that is a film that it's a really powerful film to watch. It's just a great film. It's really powerful. If you don't cry at least 3 times, you have no soul. So it's Rising. Just search Rising Phoenix on Netflix. It's a great sports film.
Yeah, it seems right up my alley. I'm not a big sports movie guy, but whenever it's actually about the people, like Rudy, I become I flip and I become a huge sucker for it, and everything about that one seems like it. Yeah, it's just spot on. Um, so, all right, next is Welcome to Earth, which I remember you doing the rounds on.
Yeah.
And so why'd you pick this one?
I really like this cue. I kind of feel this was another show where I did a bunch of music and they ended up not using it particularly wisely, shall we say. I got to the stage where they're stripping, like, you had stems of my stuff and it was all just being stripped back sometimes. It's just like drones, or I was just like, why have you hired me for this job? Like, if this is what you wanted, like, what's the point of getting me to do it? But there were, this was one of these cues which I kind of really wanted this to be the theme of the show, and it ended up getting used like twice or something. And but I really like this track for a bunch of reasons. One, I like it. Number two, it's got me singing on it,
No shit.
which is hilarious. But I can't sing. I'm basically a terrible singer. But this was all done during lockdown. It was like I had to just be inventive during lockdown.
Right.
And so this is me all pitched up, time stretched, put through some auto tune, and it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun doing something where you're like, you're just trying to make an interesting sound. And I think this album, Welcome to Earth, and there's another one called One Strange Rock, which are kind of like partner projects. And it's me playing in a sort of electronic, sort of organic sort of sound bed, sand pit, and
Right.
I kind of enjoy doing that. And it's very influenced by, like, when I was younger, there's a band called The Future Sound of London, and people like The Orb, which I really loved. And I think this is, and sort of Vangelis, and it's kind of like me entering that arena, which I enjoyed doing.
As you're saying, this, in the actual context of the show, it's some like stripped down vestige of this. It's not.
No, this did get used. This did get used, but I always thought it was a really powerful track. And they, you can write things sometimes, and when you got someone who gets your vision, it's really great because they see what the music can bring to it. But when you don't, it's obviously frustrating because it just becomes like there's people who understand how to use music, and sometimes people who don't. And I think with this, I don't think they got the best out. They definitely didn't get the best out of what I was giving them in the show.
Right. So that's you up there?
Yeah. Obviously, like I say, pitched up quite.
It barely sounds human with what you've done with it. It's very synthy.
Yeah. There's a lot of like crazy processing. There's also got a bit of a John Anderson vibe when it gets going. You'll hear what I mean.
Did you feel that nobody watched this show? I mean, I know that Will Smith hardly helped things at the right moment with it, but
yeah, I mean, it was kind of weird because originally, like, this was meant to be One Strange Rock 2 originally, and One Strange Rock was originally pitched to me as a kind of Baraka, Koyaanisqatsi, visually led series, and as it went, it became more and more celebrity led. And Will's great in the series; he is great, but it's sort of different to what I was originally told the series was going to be like.
Right.
We also got a saxophone, some beautiful saxophone playing by Thomas Challenger on this as well.
funny how in this context it doesn't really read as sax either.
Yeah, I mean, I think I might have sped that up as well. I think it's one of those things where I'm always trying to find ways of making things that don't sound conventional and like maybe what you've heard before.
How do you demo a thing like that? Do you just basically send them a finished mix and say, here it is? Because you can't really show partway steps on a thing like that.
Yeah, with stuff like that. I mean, for a show like this, which is not, it's not like a conventional drama. So yeah, it's more like, and that's what I quite liked about doing that show, is it meant I could approach it in a different way. It meant that I didn't have to write in the same way I would if I was doing a film. It'd be like I would just create a lot of tracks and a lot of ideas, and then we'd either edit them or, you know, approach it that way.
So you're not even really scoring the picture.
Well, sometimes you are, sometimes you're not. That one, for instance, wasn't. It was an early. That was like an early, you know, just idea. And you know, sometimes it'd be, if you've got a scored picture, you take the track and sort of chop it and work out how you can make it work to picture. And as long as you need to like fine tune aspects to it, or sometimes you just write a new cue totally to picture. It all depends on what would work really.
Mm. It certainly felt like something that could have been written away from it. It has that explosions in the sky, you know, just like let it unfold very gradually, and tell its own sort of thing, and then find a way to chop it in there.
Yeah.
But sometimes those things can actually be written that way to picture amazingly effectively. So, yeah, nice. I hadn't listened to that. I remember when you came to town at one point for like a screening or something of that, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And I had it in the back of my mind, like I should watch that. And like so many other things.
Well, we did a concert. The concert was amazing, and the concert was one of these things where it was just like, it was one of those weird things where I basically think they had a big budget for Will Smith, and then they're like, oh, hang on, we can't use Will Smith to do our awards campaign. Oh, we'll do a concert instead. So I think I probably was the only person who benefited from Will Smith's social exclusion for a while.
I don't know. I think Chris Rock got a little bit of marginal benefit in the long term as well.
Yeah.
He earned it, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
How did you even do that? I mean, that's so produced and so electronic. How did you even make a concert out of?
I've actually just put loads of. I've basically said, look, we can't do this live; it's completely impossible. But what we can do is I can write a bunch of other stuff and supplement it with like live. You know, so we put those lines on some strings. It was really magical, actually.
Is that video of that anywhere?
No, it's like it's kind of a weird thing where you're like, nope, it was a once in a lifetime experience and it will never happen again, and it's gone. So if you're there,
there's something nice about that, but it's a shame all the while. Let me let you go. I got one last one. This one I definitely did consciously put last. I'm almost certain that I heard this particular cue, because this was one where I remember us having dinner and you were like, I've just signed on to a thing and it's going to either be awesome or you know, nuts. And it was pretty quick turnaround, as I recall. And so this is the ending, I guess, of Amsterdam.
Yes.
Any preemptive comment?
I really like. This is one of my favorite albums. It's all woodwinds. It's kind of like woodwinds and like jazz percussion, and it's it's really fun to write a score, you know, with those kind of limitations and the different vibe. And I actually really like the film. I felt the last minute David cut a bunch of cues out, and I think it was mixed too quietly. And again, I think it was one of those things where it was quite somewhat chaotic towards the end, shall we say. And I think they missed a trick with the film, because the music, the film was so crazily chaotic in a way I thought was really made it feel very unique and quite magical. But the music, they had a big problem early on, was it was just so many different ideas, and the music was the thing that was pulling it all together, and the cohesion that would take you on the journey. So I'd scored it like a journey, but then they started pulling out some cues at the last minute and just running them without music. And I kind of think, and then they'd have other stuff where they didn't play them loud enough. And I do think it's one of those things where they probably didn't help the film doing that, because the journey that the music was taking you on, once that was vanished, it made the film feel a bit more
kind of scatterbrained,
a bit more less complicated to follow in a way. More complicated to feel the journey. And
right.
You know, it's another one of those ones where there's a lot of tracks on this album that I don't think are in the film, but this is the ending to the film, and this is like a nice culmination of the first thing you hear. And you know, it's the first time you really have a bit of brass and strings together, because I kind of kept strings and brass pretty much out of the whole score, apart from a few key moments, and especially the end.
Here we go. And I'm not wrong in remembering that you had to do this really fast, right? Wasn't this like really short turnaround?
3 weeks.
Yeah, pretty short.
You've somehow managed. Very intense.
You've somehow managed to sort of up that ante on that, but 3 weeks is pretty tight, especially for you know, a complex project. You know, that's not just cut and dry.
Yeah.
Was there any difficulty in selling them on this kind of novelty of the winds as sort of the dominant sound?
No, I mean, I watched a screening of the film, and I said I've got an idea, and I was like, I don't want to do this film if you don't think this idea is right. And if you don't think it's right, that's fine, but you don't have enough time to mess around, and we have to have a really coherent plan of like how we're going to do this. And I was like, we need something that ties it all together. And I sort of felt Woodwinds had a levity, they had an emotion, a sort of outsiderness. We call the characters kind of outsiders. And what was interesting, when you put stuff that was too conventional on them, it felt very weird, but it felt not weird, it felt wrong.
Right.
And in some ways, the Woodwinds are kind of the outsiders of the orchestra in some ways. I mean, they're not, but it's always a lot of strings and brass in film,
especially in modern Hollywood.
Yeah, and I think focusing on the woodwinds, and this was a subconscious thing, I didn't even really realize this at the time, but I think it made it feel more unusual, and it fitted with their characters and their personalities. Feel free to actually, I can't hear it on mine at the moment, so.
Oh really? Is it too low?
No, I just can't hear it.
Really? At all?
Yeah.
Oh, I know why. How about now? Did that fix it? This one definitely seemed to fall into that same problem that you were mentioning earlier of when there seems to be a kind of critical mass of like consensus on a film. People will just kind of steamroll, you know, they'll kind of just go along with, oh, okay, I heard that one, I don't need to bother with. And I remember hearing that secondhand. I was like, David O. Russell's pretty much only made good movies. But there was just you could feel that pervasive, like, it just people weren't giving it a shot the way they seemingly ought to have.
Oh yeah, I mean, it kind of felt like the guns were out straight away, and you know, that happens. It's frustrating. It's a real shame. I mean, the song, like I did the song, which I thought was really beautiful, and the song got like shortlisted for the Oscars, got down to final 15 with absolutely no support. I'm not joking, from anyone. I actually had to say to Disney, could you at least send an email out? And they only sent an email out the very last day before voting was all over, because I had bugged them. Everyone washed their hands of the film. They washed their hands of everything. And it was a real shame because, I really love this score. I really like the film. I thought the film's not a conventional film. It's not necessarily a perfect film, but it has some really touching moments in it and some really magical moments. But again, everyone sort of follows everyone else's viewpoints. And I've had that with a lot of films that I've done, and maybe it's because I'm always drawn to films that were a bit more unconventional.
Yeah, sure.
And so, it's happened to me a lot, but I'm just like, fine, whatever. It's like, I like what I did. No one else heard it.
Yeah.
Fine. It's a shame though, because this is like, I like this. This is a nice score, and I always like this theme. It's very distinctive.
Yeah, very kind of dreamy and it feels like a cousin of what you did for the Ricardos, where there's a kind of old soul language to it, but this one's propped up in such a different way from that. It's actually, ironically, feels far more modern, despite the conventionality of the winds as the sound. Like it's not like winds are some crazy electronic thing or something like that, but there's just something so novel about making that so forward about it that makes it feel more modern than the Ricardos. But the
yeah, I mean, Ricardo's is definitely a more traditional score. But, if this gets anyone listening to this score again and reevaluating it, then it's been worth doing.
Okay, good. Well, that puts a burden on my shoulders then to make sure to ensure that people go out and do their proper Spotify due diligence. Well, thanks, dude. That's a great, super eclectic. I had no idea what you were gonna sort of come up with. It was gonna be some like BBC documentary from 20 years ago, or if it was gonna be something more recent that escaped notice, or I intentionally put no parameters on it.
Yeah.
But I love how all over the place this is.
That's me. I'm all over the place.
Truly.
Like a cheap drunk at midnight.
Which I guess will be you in a few hours.
No, tonight I'm going to be well behaved. I've got to go away tomorrow. And that was me last night.
Good. Well, I'm catching you in the eye of the hurricane. Well, thanks, man. I mean, what I like about this, part of the idea for this as like a recurring series, is that I think a lot of folks out there don't realize that we work just as hard on the shit that nobody knows. There's some, I don't know. I feel like when things, especially when they get critically shit on, there's a sense that somehow people phoned it in and that's why it got shit on. And it's almost never that way. People generally, top to bottom, from the director to the, the most like anonymous grip, generally try to really make it good, even if no one sees it. Yeah.
I mean, like, it's funny because other people's reactions to your own music can actually affect your own one sometimes. If everyone says it's great, you're like, oh yeah, it is great. If everyone says it's crap, you're like, oh, is it crap? Maybe. I think you just need to listen to it and you're like, no, I'm proud of that. Like,
right.
And at the end of the day, the only critic I really care about, to be honest, is myself. And it's like, if I'm happy with something, fine. People can think it's great, they can think it's shit. I know when stuff's good and when stuff's shit. I've got some shit stuff out there as well. But we're not playing that tonight.